Now, if last year at a WEO screening conference, Matt Rutter had stood up and said that all major population-based screening programs will shortly grind to an unseemly halt, you would have dismissed it as sensationalist fiction. Pretty extraordinary situations in which developed. And yet we have already developed a paper, a group of credible authors, well known to you. And this publication will describe, I'm just trying to, lost my slides here. Okay. Will describe the response of our colleagues to the current situation. Now, at the beginning of the year, we watched the spread of this virus across the world. Bit by bit, it moved across, and we see here how the number of cases of COVID-19 grew in each of the individual countries. It moved quickly, and the numbers increased very quickly. The national screening programs faced a challenge as to at what point in time they were going to be unable to provide their service. Under normal circumstances, these would be a political decision, but the politicians were preoccupied with manipulating the situation for COVID. Resources were disappearing at a rate of knots. And so for many programs, it was the circumstances themselves that made the decision as to what point in time the screening programs need to be brought to a halt. And it was at this point in time that a group of us decided that it would be helpful to those providing screening programs if they could share their thoughts and their predicaments to give confidence and share the anxieties. And it is at this point in time that I have to thank so many of my colleagues who around the world and during these difficult times took time off to contribute to this newsletter, which has been running now through to five episodes. And now here we have a description of when the screening programs themselves ceased in the light of the COVID crisis. Commencing in Hong Kong, March was the primary month during which programs eventually drew to a halt. There were circumstances where it was brought to a halt after careful thought, but quite often the resources, the colonoscopy resources available disappeared to the extent that it was no longer possible to provide a service. Denmark managed to continue to provide a service, although the uptake diminished and the availability of colonoscopy fell away. So we had a short pause to stop and to think, to begin to think about how we were going to be able to activate the program once the COVID crisis was subsiding. What did we do? What should we be doing about the returned fit kits? What should we do about those kits that we've already received that were positive? What should we do about colonoscopy appointments? These were the crises and the decisions that we were faced with. And then the challenge then of recommencing the program, reassembling the relationship with the colonoscopy resource, and at the same time ensuring that COVID protection was being supported across the program. We had to consider prioritization of these invitations. Those that were interrupted or aborted invitations, we had fit positive kits that were awaiting colonoscopy. And we had a backlog of invitations that stretched back many months. For some, it was just 2, but for others, it was 6 or even more months of invitations not being sent out. And the question, one of the questions we had was it going to be possible to fully catch up, or what compromise was going to be necessary? Hong Kong recommenced their screening program in April, and you can see here, and you've heard a little bit about the Netherlands already, they recommenced their screening programs in May, and then June, July, and August. And the US were in a similar situation to us, and Kaiser Permanente were able to commence their program in September. So what is the current situation? Well, colonoscopy remains a challenge. We're still in the process of clearing delayed invitations. We are beginning to have to consider the continuing growth of the crisis and partial shutdowns. It seems that we are now considering more partial shutdowns rather than complete shutdowns. And then the aspiration to return invitations back to pre-COVID dates. Should they go completely back to pre-COVID dates, or should we be continuing with where we've left off? So we are in a situation now where we have many questions about the impact that COVID has had upon us. The impact of delayed FIT screening and colonoscopy. And the media is working hard to ensure that screening programs are put back and services are commenced as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that lovely talk. And this is open for questions. Perhaps while we're waiting, I'll ask, you did comment on some places where the screening program was not shut down. They're rare, those instances, and just wondered if we had any insight in terms of what the impact was. I think there were lots of concerns about continuing screening during this time, but were they realized? Were there infections? Were there significant delays between FIT and colonoscopy? Do you have any of that type of information?
Well, my understanding, Jill, is that, well, as you say, there were very few of those situations. The programs were working and delivering a smaller number of invitations and colonoscopies, but I've had no report of there being any significant problems. If we have somebody amongst the audience from Denmark, they might wish to comment on it. But it was a rarity. The majority of programs found it impossible to be able to maintain the service.
Great. Thank you, Stephen.